It was a fantasy action book set inside the temple and could currently be read on Kaka page, but the reviews always said it was a poor story. Readers were tolerant, but eventually began abandoning it and telling the writer to stop. They judged it as dull and immature. All the girls in the book seemed unaware, and readers wondered how they kept falling for such a foolish main character. They claimed the writer didn't know how to create. It was clear he wasn't following any basic plot, and some even wanted to rewrite it themselves. While the writer read those negative comments on his book, he ended up dying from high stress due to pressure. Later, an agent from the Soul Management Office of Hell, the Reaper Kim, declared it had been a sudden heart attack caused by stress. Therefore, now that he had just passed, he had to review the papers. Once Kim finished checking his status, the main character didn't know if it was a prank or not. He had literally died because his stress spiked while reading negative comments on his own work. Sai and Kim asked how many times she would have to clarify. It seemed like he still hadn't grasped, even after seeing his own body, but it was true. Even though the main character didn't want to accept it, it was simply the reality. He was looking at his own body on the table. He recalled fainting, but if that was his last memory before death, it felt a bit sad and pitiful. Kim said that, now that he had finished handling what happened, he should hurry and make his decision, as she was busy and had to move things forward. It was a shock to have died so suddenly, but now he was being forced into making a strange choice just as quickly. That's what the Reaper had clarified: when a person dies, to go to paradise, they first have to make up for their mistakes, and the mistake he committed was abandoning several series and writing stories with awful flow. He'd live as a writer. He wasn't terrible. He'd managed to survive solely off writing despite everything, so the wrongs he had committed were about how carelessly and often he dropped his own series. He'd get tired of his poorly created stories easily and start new ones as if nothing had occurred. But he was a fool. He always began writing a new book under a different name. The issue now was that everyone had to make up for their mistakes in different ways, but he didn't understand if that really mattered. Even if he wasn't proud of the things he did, he couldn't grasp how that could be a mistake. The Reaper replied that it was a rather small mistake in terms of the effect it had on a single person. The issue was that it happened many times to many people, so the size of this problem was huge. The main character couldn't comprehend what kind of system this was. It seemed that this careless writer needed to make up for his mistakes. To do so, he would have to pick one of his finished books to be placed into at random, becoming one of its many characters, and then he'd have to endure until the end. The moment this situation was presented, the main character immediately felt like it was a real-life isekai. He wanted to yell, but Kim smiled because it was funny when someone got a one-way trip straight to hell. Besides, this was his own book, so he could know the entire story without needing to worry too much. It actually felt more like a prize than a penalty, and the main character responded that it really depended on the book. No matter how much he thought about it, all the books he had created so far had no happy endings at all. In the list of his finished works, there was first, The City of the Dead. It was a zombie disaster, so he could beg he'd end up zombie food in no time within that world. The second was Surviving in a Ruined World, a post-disaster survival story. There was no way he'd make it through that, considering he died reading negative comments online. The third was called The Hunter Became a Manager, a modern action story about monster trackers. There was a good chance that, instead of becoming a tracker, he'd just be some nobody who got crushed by a monster without being able to do anything. The fourth option was Somehow the Game Became Reality, but in it, he was just a cleaner. The title already said a lot about the story. It was a fantasy dungeon game, and right at the start, 90% of people die during a process the system uses to take over reality. The main character simply had no confidence he could endure in any of his finished books. Among those choices, it seemed like only one might be possible. The Demon King is Dead, a calm school story with a fantasy setting. It was a relatively peaceful story that he wrote after getting tired of only writing intense books, and for now it was his best choice, although he ended up dying because of it. Being a calm story set in a school after a war made it a bit better. It was the one with the lowest chances of him dying, a book where the final villain dies right at the start and was made to tell what happened afterward. That was definitely the best choice because, since it would be random, he didn't even need to be the main character to live a decent life. He'd be lucky if he ended up as just one of the students at the school. Even so, he wondered why that book felt bad. He recalled it was because something happened halfway through, and that's when Kim interrupted, saying that if he took too long, she'd pick for him. She especially liked The City of the Dead, and the main character immediately begged for The Demon King is Dead. Kim sighed and agreed that they could go with that choice, then wished him good luck, which puzzled him. All of a sudden, she simply clapped her hands, and the whole scene changed. But when he saw his own look, the main character suddenly appeared completely different. He was in his room right now, and wondered what kind of fancy room this was, noticing there were also horns on his head. Besides that, he was wearing elegant clothes. It was kind of shocking that he was really inside his own book. He wished he could talk to the Reaper, even if he'd just been thrown in without any explanation. Suddenly, he was caught off guard because his status screen appeared in front of his eyes. He couldn't comprehend what kind of typical plot this was. It said his name was Valier Jr., had basic attributes, and his race was Archdemon. He had no skills and possessed the demon control skill. The main character couldn't understand anything. It seemed like he was a low-level demon lord. The book's title was The Demon King is Dead, and yet he was a demon lord. It felt like something had happened that he didn't even expect, but it wasn't even possible. The random character he had become wasn't so random after all. Suddenly, he heard a loud noise, and a huge blast occurred, sending Valier flying far away. It was a massive shock that a blast had happened right before his eyes, and the system began an opening event called Destruction. The defeat of the demon army was near, and he had no strength at all, but he had to give it his all to endure. Valier's task was to escape from the demon lord's castle, and if he could manage that, he would earn a total of 100 points. After that scene, out of nowhere, a body appeared in front of the main character, and he noticed that several monsters were dying around him. To summarize the events, he ended up inside the book. The Demon King is dead, exactly as planned, and as a result of the random character pick, he arrived in this place right in the middle of the collapsing demon realm as a character who had never even appeared in the book. 17 years old, and with no fighting skills, he ended up becoming the heir of the demon lord, the same demon lord who was killed at the start of the story. It was Valier Jr., the prince of the crumbling demon kingdom. Valier ran as the castle fell, calling that cursed Reaper a huge trickster for deceiving him. Even though Kim had said he would become a random character inside the book and might even get a prize for it, he still didn't understand why he had to be the demon lord's heir, and the reason why the castle was falling was pretty clear. The demon lord and the hero were in the middle of their final fight. That was the opening scene he had created himself in a book called The Demon King is Dead. In the book, both the demon lord and the hero died, and the war ended with the human's victory, and now he was the demon Prince Valier, which meant that the moment he got caught, he would certainly be killed. While running, he paused for a moment because he needed to think about it and wondered how he could endure in such a scary situation. There had been a system screen next to him for a while now, something he had never added in his book. But according to the typical status screen of that world, he was now Valier Jr. and had those attributes available. The main character didn't know the exact measure, but there was no way he could consider the available stats to be high. Being the final villain as the Demon Lord would have been much better. He could have fled or tried to make a deal. Anything would have been better than the current situation. Valier had no special abilities that could help him endure or escape. The only useful thing was the fact that he could understand the language of this world, so his only remaining choice now was to escape. He hoped he could find something useful inside the storage area. He reached the storage area, hoping to find something helpful, but it was shocking that there was only trash inside that warehouse. That's why they were losing to the Imperial Army. There was nothing in there that could be of use. While looking, Valier suddenly found a book of magic papers. In the book, he had created it so that even someone who couldn't use magic could activate them just by opening the paper. He opened the book and checked. The things he was searching for should be in there somewhere. While looking, he ended up finding a teleportation paper, a movement spell that moves the user to a specific place. The magic paper had teleport written on it, but at the rate the castle was being ruined, he would end up buried in the ruins first. Valier had to try to get as far away as possible, so he attempted to use the teleport to get out of there, but he ended up still in the same place and wondered why it wasn't working yet. Due to a magic movement block, the system notified him that the spell he tried to cast had been immediately stopped. Valier realized he was completely doomed in this situation. He didn't even have time to look for other ways to escape. He wondered if he should try begging for them to spare his life. That's when he suddenly found another spell in the book called Disguise. Disguise was something the user could use to change their look and mask themselves as something else. The main character didn't know if disguising himself as a human would actually work, but he would try anything he could. He still had doubts about whether it would succeed. Nevertheless, Valier Jr.'s escape plan from the Demon Lord's castle had begun. The first thing he had to do was mask himself as a human with a disguise spell, sneak into the human prison, and be saved by the Imperial Army along with the other prisoners. Later on, he could find a chance to escape, and his survival task would be a great success. The best way for Valier to endure in this situation was to be saved by the Imperial Army, so he entered the prison cells after using the disguise spell. However, he didn't understand why it was so quiet inside. He wondered if he had entered the wrong place. That was when he stopped and noticed a horrible smell. It was the smell of blood, and he felt like he had just stepped on something while walking. That's when he realized it was his severed hand, and he fell back screaming. He had come into contact with a dead person's blood. The main character froze at the sight of that horrific scene. For some reason, all the prisoners were dead. He had never created anything like this in his book. It was supposed to be a simple love comedy, and he wondered if he should just run away again. But Valier didn't even know what he could do after escaping. He had to do something. That's when he noticed someone was there. It had to be a survivor. A bit nervous, the main character approached and asked if the person was okay. He realized it was a girl sitting beside someone lying on the ground. It looked like the girl was a child who was scared and shrank back when she saw the main character approaching. He apologized for frightening her, saying it was because they were prisoners, and asked if she was all right. He sighed in relief, seeing that she seemed unharmed, but it looked like the person lying beside her was likely a family member, so he told her not to worry. He would be saved soon and asked if she wanted to wait with him if that was okay, but she stayed silent, staring intensely at Valier. He realized he may have crossed the line. It seemed like she found him suspicious. He laughed nervously because he was actually terrified out of his mind. This was the Demon Lord's castle after all. Maybe it was better if they stuck together. The girl stared at him and began to tremble, and he quickly apologized, realizing he may have asked too much, but still tried to explain himself. She wiped the tears from her face and finally said it was okay, asking him to sit beside her. But in truth, Valier felt that the situation was a bit strange, and she commented on how calm he seemed. That made the main character let out a nervous laugh, replying that it was scary for him too, honestly, which wasn't a lie. He really was scared. After all, his plan failed. He'd be killed or caught instantly. It wasn't like he had other choices. If he was going to fail, so be it. But then he noticed something in his cloak. When he touched it, he realized there was something inside. Earlier, Valier had found it in the pocket of the clothes he had been wearing and kept it with him. At the moment, he wasn't hungry enough to eat those cookies, and he started talking to the girl who had picked it up a bit earlier. He asked if she wanted to share and offered her the cookie. She accepted after a brief moment of surprise. Valier was surprised. She must have been starving after being trapped here all this time, but for some reason, she was eating very little. He wondered if maybe she didn't like cookies, and he said they just needed to wait a bit longer. The Imperial Army should be coming to save them. Suddenly, they heard a voice shouting that the prison cells had been found, and Valier froze as he realized the men had finally arrived. Several men stormed into the cells and approached the two of them. One man widened his eyes in shock upon seeing them. He was stunned. Valier didn't understand why they were reacting like that just because they had found some prisoners. Their reactions were a bit odd. Then the man knelt down, begging for Her Imperial Majesty to punish him for not arriving sooner to save her life. The main character turned around, shocked as he realized that the old man had just bowed to the girl and called her Her Imperial Majesty. That girl was the first imperial princess of the Guardius Empire, Charlotte de Guardius, and she had been placed there in the cells. In the end, the main character's task to endure was a success, and he had completed the opening, receiving 100 success points. Later, at the military base of the Imperial Army, several soldiers were hurt. Fortunately, being saved alongside Princess Charlotte, who had been with him, turned out to be a good thing, but the situation was tricky. Charlotte began eating a whole plate of food, and he had been saved by a nobleman alongside the princess who happened to be with him, but in the end, he was still a demon deceiving others with a low-ranked spell called disguise. If by any chance, the princess's mage claimed they might have been cursed by demonic magic and used dispel on them, that would be the end. Moreover, Charlotte had asked her men to take care of Valier first because he was her rescuer. The princess was taking care of him far too well. In short, they were paying way too much attention to him for him to sneak away unnoticed. And there was one more thing. Charlotte de Guardius, the girl in front of him, was a character who never appeared in his original book. He had never created her before, and during their meal, a man approached, apologizing for the interruption. Since they were at a military base, this was the best they could prepare for Charlotte to eat. She smiled and thanked Lance for the kindness. Lance thanked her for understanding and said that, as soon as Duke Salin arrived, they would take her back to the Imperial Palace. Charlotte thanked them, saying it was a relief, then smiled and thanked the main character for what he had done for her in the cell. Valier didn't feel like he had done anything and asked her if just being there had brought her some comfort. Even so, the princess insisted that he had helped her a lot, and in return, she wanted to bring him safely to his hometown and asked him its name. Valier got nervous and wondered how he should answer that. A hometown. A region. He wasn't even sure if he had anything like that. He couldn't recall anything of the sort. However, Valier felt a deep stare aimed at him. That's when he noticed that it was Lance looking at him with a scary expression, so Valier answered that he didn't recall anything. Lance was staring like he was about to kill him just because he took too long to respond, so he decided to make something up. She was shocked and began to cry, and Valier wondered how the princess could believe that, asking himself if she was too innocent or just foolish to say something like that. Charlotte imagined that he must have gone through many struggles while imprisoned, making Valier sigh in relief because she was so naive. Wiping her tears, Charlotte declared that he no longer needed to worry about it. She swore in her name that she would help him regain his memories. He bowed and thanked the princess, and Lance was surprised that Charlotte had made such a promise, but she was determined to keep it. She couldn't go back on her word and asked if they planned to let her become a liar. Lance stammered in denial, and even though Valier felt like a liar, he was grateful for her intentions, even if it was impossible to keep that promise. That was because Charlotte would die in the original book. There was no description of the Demon Lord's castle prison conditions. A backstory he didn't know must have been automatically created for the structure and realism of this world. If a princess's existence was one of those elements of realism, then Valier couldn't predict her future. He had never created her story to begin with, but knowing Bertus, the prince he had created, he would never let rivals live if they stood in his way to the throne. That innocent girl probably didn't even know her own fate. Even her life was at risk, and Valier wondered what he could do for her. Being so weak, in truth, the princess dying and him escaping the danger would be more fitting, but he would become a real jerk for that. The main character wondered what kind of thoughts those were. A child's life was at risk right now. He wished he could tell her that her life was in danger. If he could push her away by doing that, she might be able to help if something unexpected happened. Sighing, Charlotte said she felt sick from eating too much and asked Lance to call a healer for her. Lance stammered that he still had to ensure her safety, but the princess asked if there was any reason to be in danger now that the demon lord was dead. Finally, Lance agreed with her and decided to leave to call a healer, which made her thank him for his concern. Then Charlotte turned serious and began with an apology, which left Valier completely puzzled. She looked like a completely different person now, especially because Charlotte stated that it was her fault he was going to die. She couldn't share details about the imperial family, but there was a high chance that she would be killed in the near future. If things continued like this, the one responsible would be her half-brother, Bertus Degardius. Most people on this base were probably his allies, and the fact they were keeping her there without letting her leave meant they had no intention of sending a message saying she had been saved. Thinking back, Valier realized that Charlotte had been covered in a thick cloak when she was saved. People likely didn't know there had been any survivors among the prisoners in the Demon Lord's castle. She knew they were probably waiting for orders to get rid of her quickly. They might poison her and claim they found her dead in the Demon Lord's castle. If Charlotte died like that, they wouldn't let the main character escape. He would be quietly killed to erase the evidence along with her. Valier, stammering, asked if they should try asking the mess for help, but she replied that it would be useless. There was no one she could trust, and the main character wondered if that included Lance too. It was a complete dead end. However, Charlotte assured him he didn't need to worry. After all, she had sworn on her name that she would help him regain his memories. Then she said they needed to escape from there. She planned to draw their attention, and Valier felt that they really didn't have much time. The main character ended up agreeing with her idea and ran off to carry out the plan. Even so, he suddenly received a major task from the princess, and Valier was surprised to find out she actually planned to escape. Charlotte said there was only one way to get out of there alive, and he asked how that could be possible. She replied that they had to bring Sir Francis there, and Valier asked who exactly that was. She apologized, realizing she should have explained more. Charlotte asked if the main character recalled the knight who saved them from the Demon Lord's castle earlier. Valier realized she meant that scary guy from before, and she explained that William Franco was one of the few people from the neutral group. He was loyal only to the imperial family itself, and Valier understood that he must be someone trustworthy. If he had been on the prince's side, then both of them would have been dead in the Demon Lord's castle from the start. But Francis saved them anyway, which meant he was an excellent knight with strong loyalty to the imperial family. Valier thought that if someone truly neutral supported Charlotte, then he might have a chance to endure as well. With that, the main character decided to follow her words, and the princess thanked him for believing in her. Since now they could return safely together, then she suggested they could escape even with tight security, and he asked how they were supposed to do that. She began explaining the plan. First, she would become the bait, and Valier was worried because that sounded risky. She said it was, but she'd be fine at least until someone arrived who could decide her fate, so he had to hurry. Charlotte held his hand since they didn't have much time, and Valier could feel her hands shaking. Given the situation, he agreed he had no choice but to work with the imperial princess, and so she walked out of the tent in front of the guards. They told her it was risky and that she should stay inside the tent, but Charlotte said she wanted to see the barracks. That was a bit troublesome for them, but the princess insisted she was the imperial princess and wanted to see the barracks. They had no power to stop her. They kept insisting they couldn't allow it. Their duty as knights was to keep her safe, but Charlotte kept buying time. Valier managed to slip out of the tent unnoticed, but he wondered where Francis had gone. While searching around the base, suddenly a man approached and asked what he was doing. The main character replied that he wanted to speak with Francis. The knight said that Francis had just left for the demon lord's castle and asked what business Valier had with him. Valier froze when he heard that the plan was ruined now that Francis had gone that far away. The man explained that it was something Lance had requested, so Francis had gone to take care of the leftovers at the demon lord's castle, and the main character immediately understood Lance's intentions. He was the knight on the princess's side. It was possible he had foreseen the plan and made his move first, so now there was only one choice left. The knight asked again what Valier wanted with Francis. If he didn't answer, he would report him, and the main character stammered because it was an emergency, catching the man off guard. He stuttered, explaining that Francis was in danger. Valier wasn't going to let this man stop him over something like that. The knight exclaimed that they had to save Francis immediately, or at least that's what Valier hoped he would say. Instead, the man asked what the main character was talking about. Valier thought it would be too easy if he believed him just like Charlotte had. Slowly, Valier answered that he didn't know all the details, but something involving Francis and her Imperial Highness was happening. For the safety of Charlotte and Francis, they had to bring him back right away. Though clearly, someone like him had no reason to be trusted, the man said he believed Valier, which shocked him, and added that he was saying he believed in a nobody like him. The main character stammered, asking if he'd really do that. He knew he shouldn't be saying this, especially since he hadn't given any reason to be trusted. The knight laughed, saying it was true, but if he had to give a reason, maybe it was because Valier was so desperate that any stranger could see it. Valier got nervous hearing that, but the man said he understood. Part of it was just gut feeling telling him it was true. He also thought Francis might have predicted something like this when he told them to stay on alert. He said someone might show up. Valier was surprised and wondered if Francis had known about this the entire time. He had always known what could happen to the princess. Even so, the main character questioned why he had left and gone to the demon lord's castle instead. He should have stayed by her side to protect her. The knight then said they should get going and asked if he had ever ridden a horse before. Valier replied that he had never ridden a horse, but the man answered there was nothing to worry about. His steed was excellent. With that, he turned around and asked him to follow. They could leave once he found his horse. Valier had no choice but to ask Francis directly. The man finally introduced himself as Dyrus, and the two walked off, unaware that Lance was secretly watching everything. Dyrus rode with Valier on his horse, and on the way, he saw a demon being thrown into a cage by other men. The main character wondered why there were other demons, so Valier asked Dyrus about it while they continued riding. He asked why there were demons by the roadside, and Dyrus replied that they were captives. After all, there had been a fight there. If they had been caught, they were either defeated soldiers or non-fighters. All of them were being locked up. They were still checking the areas around the demon lord's castle, and once they returned to headquarters, all of them would be killed, so there was no need to worry. And Valier replied that he understood, realizing that if he had turned himself in, this would have happened to him too. Soon, they were nearly there and would be getting off the horse. It didn't take long before a few other knights noticed them approaching. One of them asked who the two were, and Dyrus greeted them by introducing himself as the leader of the 3rd platoon of the 11th squad of the 4th regiment of knights from the 1st corps. The knight asked what brought Dyrus there. He replied that Valier had something important to say to Francis, and so he had brought him since it was a private matter. He brought him to speak with Francis directly. The knight grew nervous upon hearing that. After all, They had just received a report saying that Francis had died in battle against the remaining demons. Valier froze, shocked by what he had just heard, and they murmured that it was truly a shame that he had been lost. If that were the case, there was no one left who could stand by the princess now. The knight asked if the message was something he should know. Valier denied it, saying it was a personal matter to discuss with Francis, and the man turned them away, saying this wasn't a place for outsiders. If that was the case, Dyrus thanked him, but Valier began to panic. He realized things had been going far too well, and now understood the reason why. Francis being killed by rebellious demons was clearly a lie. Bertus wanted to end Charlotte's life. He wanted to cover up the fact that she had survived the Demon Lord's castle, so, just as Charlotte had said, he would want to erase all possible evidence, even if it meant killing everyone who knew she was still alive, and that would include Francis as well. Therefore, Francis had been taken to the Demon Lord's castle and killed. Valier worried about what was coming for Charlotte, but didn't want to give up. He needed to think about what to do now. That's when Dyrus told him that this time he needed to tell the whole truth. The real reason he had said Francis was in danger and the princess as well, which made the main character fall silent. Hesitating, he wondered if he could trust Dyrus. According to Charlotte, most of the military was on Prince Bertus's side, so he didn't know if Bertus' influence had already reached a lower-ranking officer like Dyrus, but he had no one else to trust. After that, Valier ended up confessing the truth from when he was locked up with the princess and how Francis had saved them. Dyrus reflected on what he heard, responding that if things were really as Valier said, then Francis had been killed by knights rather than in battle against demons. Valier agreed he believed there was a high chance that was what happened. Dyrus then asked if he planned to save the princess. If that was the case, then it was all right. Dyrus declared that he also planned to save the princess's life, and Valier was quite surprised. The man said he was part of Francis's group, so it made sense that he would join forces and trust the main character to keep Charlotte safe. If Dyrus said so, Valier felt relieved. He still couldn't trust him completely, but at least he might get some help to escape. But Dyrus said it didn't make sense for them to be there at the Demon Lord's castle. They should go back to save the princess from the outside. The main character finally had the chance to see the Demon Lord's castle. However, Valier asked Dyrus to wait because he had a good plan, and so they entered the castle again. The knight said that the idea of searching the demon's supplies for items that could help them escape was actually clever, but he noted that when they reached the room, it had clearly been a while since someone had been there, and Valier tried not to look too guilty since he was the one who had checked the room earlier. Even so, there had to be something useful if they took a good look. Dyrus replied that the demons must have taken the place after the Demon Lord died. Anyway, all demons were damned selfish and gross, and the main character tried not to react to the comment. After everything, setting aside the fact that he was the one who had taken the stuff, Valier suggested they should take a look around. That's when he found something, and Dyrus was surprised that he found something useful so quickly. The main character tried to act casual since he had already seen everything before, and they realized it was a teleportation paper. Dyrus noticed it was one that used demon magic. Valier said they should grab as many papers as they could in case they came in handy. He also laughed, pretending it was just luck as he found a book full of papers. If they put them there, it'd be easier to grab them when needed. Dyrus thought about how she had heard Valier was a prisoner, but even so, she wondered how he knew where the papers were. Soon, they managed to gather everything, and Dyrus said they should hurry back in time. She asked if Valier could recall the way they came, and while the main character was pointing it out, suddenly the knight told him to be quiet and led him in another direction. Valier was puzzled, but then Dyrus whispered that there were others nearby. Knights had entered the supply room. They were talking among themselves, saying they saw the other two entering the castle, rats hiding inside the Demon Lord's castle. These were knights of the Salon Duchy. Dyrus whispered that things were really getting tricky. That was Bertus' maternal family and one of the strongest noble families in the empire. They wanted to put Bertus on the throne. Because of that, most knights from the Salon Duchy weren't common-born knights. In fact, all of them were high-ranking knights with noble status. That's how the main character had created it. Bertus killing Francis for not obeying him was likely part of all this too. If they tried to escape in that large castle, it would become a problem. The knights didn't think they needed to worry since they'd find the two hiding soon enough. Valier wondered if they really would find them so quickly and how that was even possible. Then one knight's eye began to glow. The man confirmed their location, stating they were behind a stone statue. He could hear their breathing from there. Valier was shocked that they could even be heard, and the men raised their voices, saying they knew they were hiding. One of them drew his sword, and said it'd be better if they just came out obediently, and so Valier and Dyrus emerged from hiding with no other choice. The knight muttered that the princess was truly pitiful, dragging innocent people to die with her. Dyrus shouted that he was a jerk, asking if he couldn't even see how shameful he was trying to kill the princess. But to the man, it didn't matter what some unknown kid like him said. He didn't feel bad about killing a young civilian, though it was all for the sake of the Empire's future, and Dyrus told the main character to stay back. Valier grew tense. He had gone through so much just to escape the Demon Lord's castle, and now that he was back, it seemed like he was going to die. To die again like this, it hadn't even been a full day since he lost his life due to high stress. Suddenly, the main character turned and noticed there was a gargoyle statue beside him. In comics and games, they started moving at moments like this, and that was exactly what happened. The soldiers froze as the gargoyle suddenly started moving. The commander of the knights was defeated by the gargoyle as it suddenly lunged at them. Valier wondered how that happened. He had only thought that maybe it could move, but he didn't understand what triggered it. Dyrus didn't know what happened either, but this was their chance to win, and she grabbed Valier's wrist so they could run while the gargoyle handled the soldiers. The two of them ran and took advantage of the opening to endure. They got a horse and began rushing away. Dyrus asked why the gargoyle moved, and Valier said he didn't know either, but obviously it was a lie because the main character recalled the status window he saw after arriving in this world, and in it, there was a skill called E-rank demon control. Perhaps because he was the Demon Lord's heir, he was certain he had awakened the gargoyle unconsciously using the D-rank demon control skill. He just hoped Dyrus wouldn't suspect anything, but Dyrus said it was a good thing since they managed to escape safely. Still, Valier was worried because they had almost died when suddenly Dyrus noticed a new problem. The other soldiers were already chasing after them on horseback at full speed, trying to catch up. The soldiers shouted that they needed to hurry before Dyrus and Valier could escape the forest, and things got tricky. There were so many men that Valier told Dyrus to grab his waist. Dyrus didn't understand what the main character was thinking of doing. The main character mentally begged for something decent to appear because he didn't want to die there now. That's when he stopped and saw something important, so Valier used the paper from the book to cast speed, refusing to let things end like this. First, he used speed to increase the pace of their horse and create good distance from the enemies chasing them. With that, they managed to widen the gap thanks to the magic, and Dyrus sighed, barely believing Valier could know such a spell. Because of that, the soldiers couldn't catch up, but then he choked mid-breath because an arrow flew right past his nose. Now they were using the distance to shoot at them while they were running. Dyrus said they weren't going to go easy on them. Valier needed to use something better to deal with knights, so the main character chose something that caught Dyrus off guard. He said that spell wouldn't work on knights trained in galloping. He thought it was completely useless. Valier knew that well. It was because of the traits he himself had created for them. It would have been ridiculous for knights to die from just one spell. He had created a galloping class at the temple, so Valier had no intention of using that spell on the knights. He couldn't believe that a trait he had given to his characters was now causing such a huge problem for him. Instead, the main character used an illusion spell on the horses. Fortunately, only the knights were trained against illusions, not their mounts. The soldiers couldn't understand why their horses had suddenly stopped running, and it wasn't just the horses themselves. Valier was glad to see that it worked, because the horses were struggling to move and start running again. Next was the charm spell. He kept using different spells against the horses to make them stop chasing them. He only had 2 spells left, but when he looked for the mind control one, he realized the race was over. Dyrus said their horse was tired at that pace. Siren's knights would catch up to them soon. Valier wondered what he should do. That's when he saw something ahead of them, captured demons nearby. They had been caught after the Demon Lord's army was defeated, but then he felt a strange sensation. It was the same as when he had moved the gargoyle, and within seconds, one of the demons broke the chains that were holding them. Dyrus was shocked, wondering what was wrong with that orc since it was running toward them. Worried they were about to die, but the orc ran right past them and charged toward the men who were still chasing them. The soldiers wondered how the prisoners managed to escape when there were supposed to be guards watching them, but it didn't take long before the orc started killing the soldiers. They shouted at it to get out of their way. Valier said they should take this chance to escape, and Dyrus agreed, riding off again on his horse. The main character was relieved it had worked. The demon control skill had activated, and now they could escape. Dyrus just remained silent, watching. It was odd they kept receiving help from demons in moments of danger far too often to be coincidence. Even so, Dyrus felt it was still too early to start suspecting the main character. First, he needed to focus on saving the princess. Soon, the two of them arrived at the military base, and Dyrus introduced himself, saying he needed to report at Charlotte's tent. The soldier asked for his affiliation and questioned how a mere lieutenant dared to ask to see the imperial princess. With Dyrus remaining silent, the soldier asked if he really thought they would let him enter with that boy. He let it slide this time but told him to leave. At that, Dyrus said it was time for Plan B and immediately drew his sword against the soldier to force him out of the way. Other soldiers approached, asking what was going on, and Dyrus complained because they had ended up getting caught. Even so, he let Valier go ahead so he could save the imperial princess, and the main character entered the tent just in time to see two men standing with her. They questioned who he was, making it clear that they were told not to let anyone else inside. Charlotte was surprised, but Valier shouted for her to close her eyes, using a flash spell to blind the two men. Then he asked the princess to follow him, grabbing her hand and using his mass teleportation to escape to the imperial capital, Guardium. A great light burst out, and Valier completed the opening sequence, earning the advanced special trait, Historical Turning Point. An important character who wasn't alive in the original timeline, Charlotte de Gardius, had survived, and the future was drastically changed because of that, thus ending the opening. The imperial capital, Guardium, was the place where the main story of The Demon King is Dead took place. Guardium had been modeled after Su, the place where the main character was born. Charlotte and Valier arrived there after successfully teleporting. Since he was the one who had created every detail about this place, and it resembled Su, he thought he'd feel emotional upon arriving, but he couldn't have been more wrong. There was no way he could have created such a massive place with so many details. The main character wondered how anyone could write a city that big. Then Valier calmed down, realizing he couldn't get lost in writer mode and needed to focus more on the imperial princess. Charlotte asked if this was really the imperial capital, even though they had just been inside the Demon Realm's camp. It seems she was puzzled about the sudden teleportation destination, and the main character decided he should explain when it happened. Valier apologized for bringing her to the capital without a proper explanation because, when he arrived, Francis had already died. Charlotte was shocked and asked if they had really made it there just with Valier's power. He denied it, saying that wasn't exactly it. They were helped by someone else. That person was Dyrus, who had also appeared via teleportation, relieved to see they were safe. Valier was relieved that Dyrus made it out unharmed, and he said he was fine, but if he'd been delayed even slightly, he would have died. Their plan B was something they created in case they failed to sneak in due to the strictness of the guards. First, Dyrus would buy time by drawing attention. Valier would enter the tent and escape first with Charlotte. Then he would escape with the remaining teleport paper. They were lucky there was even one paper left, or else Dyrus would have died. Then Charlotte asked who this man was, and Dyrus bowed, saying he was a lieutenant. It was a great honor to meet her, so he asked to explain all the events that had happened up to now. He thoroughly explained everything to Charlotte, from Francis's death and the sneaking into the Demon Lord's castle to the moment they almost died being chased by the Knights of Salin. By chance, a gargoyle had stopped the Salin Knights inside the castle, and one of the demons went into a frenzy and bought time for them to escape. There was also the convenient fact that they reached the imperial capital, thanks to the teleport paper they had found in the Demon Lord's castle. Even Valier, if he were in Dyrus's shoes, would have found all those coincidences suspicious. After everything, the fact that the main character was always at the center of the solution made him seem very suspicious, and from the way Charlotte was peering at Valier, it was clear she was suspicious of him. It would have been even stranger if she fully trusted him. She had been raised in the harsh environment of imperial politics. Honestly, that was better. If he stayed near her for too long, his identity would soon be exposed. During their walk, Valier knew this would be his last chance to escape safely, so to be separated from the two of them in the middle of the street alone, the main character felt he was facing one heck of a problem. He had almost died several times already, and even after saving Charlotte, he couldn't receive any reward because he was a demon in disguise. Now he was starving too, but no one would give even a coin to help with that. If he had known this would happen, he would have created a convenient trait like demons being able to survive using only mana. Suddenly, Valier received a system notice stating that, with new traits, demons could now be fed solely by mana, but that was a trait that required 100,000 success points, and the main character was extremely surprised. The system congratulated him because he had earned the power to interfere with the world of The Demon King is Dead. His failed book had been classified as a terrible mess of letters, and Valier was both shocked and offended at the same time. It felt like the system was throwing the truth in his face while mocking him just to make fun of him. The system explained that his actions could change the main story, and additionally, he would receive conquest points as rewards for the events he faced. He could also receive conquest points by completing tasks, so he could check the list of active tasks, which would be updated regularly. The system displayed all the tasks. It started with slapping the emperor on the cheek, which offered 10,000 points. Another was getting locked up in Guardium's jail, which gave one's 200 points. He could then escape from prison for 2,000 points, then pickpocket a night without getting caught for 100 points, or buy a 100-meter house using only money from begging for 1,000 points. The list was so random that Valier wondered what kind of strange and tough tasks these were supposed to be. As a reward for completing the opening, the special ability to use conquest points was unlocked. The system showed the point, spending choices. He could use revision to change world traits, give himself talents, or alter parts of the story. There was also preview, which could be used to check how his actions, decisions, or use of revision had changed the timeline. He also received a warning that interfering with major events or with main characters might be impossible or might require a large amount of points. Using the ability in a way that might cause a trait collapse could make it fail to activate. If he wasn't aware of a potential trait collapse and tried to use the ability, there would be a penalty. Valier felt it was getting too complex as the system went on to explain that traits, once added or pre-existing, could not be removed. The system showed that he could directly interfere with the world's features through the use of conquest points. Important events might be unchangeable or require a large amount of conquest points. An ability could not be used to cause a collapse of traits. Attempts to force such an outcome would be penalized. It also offered a summary for the fool who didn't like to read despite being a writer, and once again, Valier was frustrated with the sarcastic system, but it didn't matter now. He needed to stay calm. It might be complex, but this seemed like a powerful ability that could be useful to stay alive. He had a few points and needed to check what he could do now. Then, suddenly, the system asked if he wanted to view the writer's advice. He could choose between clear advice and vague advice and asked what the difference between them was. The vague advice asked how so many people were taken in the Demon Lord's castle, and Valier had no idea what that meant since it sounded like a puzzle. He had wasted 150 points for nothing, while the clear advice told him to go straight to the magic item shop now. That was decent advice. At least he could trust that so far, and the system had been suggesting he support himself by selling the papers he had. It seemed to be suggesting he make quick money using the magic papers he took from the castle, but that wasn't quite it, actually, and Valier headed to the Allegard district, the commercial area, where a man asked who he thought he was trying to trick. Another laughed after seeing the pages of the paper he offered. It was the first time he saw someone trying a scam like that. Someone else said that if he had that kind of artistic skill, he should go to an art school instead of wasting time with this. All the vendors thought he was just some crazy kid trying to scam them with fake papers. That was odd. The system had told him to go to a magic item shop, but apparently, it wasn't so he could sell the papers. Valier arrived at a fourth store to try selling a magic paper. Now even hungrier after walking so much, he visited the shop and walked in, asking if anyone was there, but there was no one sitting at the counter to greet him. The shop was a complete mess. It looked like they weren't even open, and Valier didn't notice someone approaching from behind. Soon, he turned around and saw a woman smiling at him, asking if he was a customer, what brought him there, whether he needed a paper or a potion. He replied that he came to sell a paper, and she smiled, saying it was mean to play tricks like that on adults. Valier grew tense under her gaze. The girl said she normally didn't buy papers, but she couldn't let him walk around with something risky, offering 2 gold coins in exchange. That's when she paused and asked him to tell the truth, and Valier didn't understand what she meant until she asked where he got that paper. It was a magical formula used only by demons. The main character froze, realizing she was pressing him even more, demanding to know why he had it. The magic itself existed, he knew that, but how it existed was something even the main character couldn't explain. How the spell was activated and the casting method were details he hadn't specifically said in that book, so there shouldn't have been a way to distinguish a human magical formula from a demonic one just by looking at it like that. Since the other merchants weren't mages and knew nothing about demonic magic, they just assumed it was a faulty version, but the woman in front of him had realized the truth and was demanding that Valier answer her questions properly. She kept pressing, asking where he had obtained that paper, and the main character found himself completely cornered. For some reason, the woman was so stubbornly persistent that he didn't even know how to respond anymore, so he whispered toward the notice window, asking if it could make the girl ignore the paper now, and the notice said the setting would cost 3,000 points. He muttered under his breath that the notice was completely useless. The woman asked what he was doing talking to himself, and Valier wondered if he really needed to tell her everything, so slowly he began to try to answer, saying he had gotten it from the demon lord's castle. She shouted, asking if he thought that was a valid excuse, demanding the full truth before she hit him. Valier gestured for her to wait, saying he was going to tell everything as it happened, and then he explained a bit of the situation to her, but the girl felt he was lying. If he had saved the imperial princess, he should receive an extraordinary reward or an amazing title. Valier said he wasn't lying. There had been a clash with the Knights of the Salon Duchy during the escape. The imperial prince Bertus might even try to kill him, and she hesitated, feeling like the story seemed a bit too made up. The main character sighed. His acting had been perfect after all. She was a specialist at making up silly stories. Then she smiled and asked if, in the end, the demon lord was dead. Whether it was him or the imperial princess, it must have been hard for the two of them, suffering under him. She suddenly hugged him, saying, Valier must have worked really hard up to now, and he grew nervous, not knowing what was going on. Truthfully, Valier admitted he didn't quite recall it all that clearly, so it was okay. But he was still starving and felt a bit uneasy, so he just wished to depart already. Then she mentioned he might still be holding some kind of hex from the Demon King's fortress and offered to cast Remove Curse on him. He was anxious as she told him to stay there for a second, but he wanted her to pause a moment. That's because, if that girl lifted the spell he had placed on himself, he would be revealed as a demon. While Valier kept pleading with her to hold off, she simply performed the magic and exposed his true nature as a demon. Now he was in deep trouble and let out a shaky chuckle, asking what had just occurred. However, the girl addressed him as Prince and wondered if he didn't recall her by any chance, but Valier had no clue who she was. Abruptly, she used a charm in another tongue, and the main character was shocked to discover that she was a vampire. Even so, she kept questioning if the main character truly couldn't remember her. They couldn't just leave matters like this. She wanted to begin by shifting him to another place. If they remained there, they would end up being spotted by others. They should go to her chamber on the second level to continue the talk, and Valier consented, even without understanding what was happening. In the room, she said he must be famished, but at least had some treats to provide, and he thanked her for the gesture. The girl kept speaking politely with him, and yet wound up being relaxed, even after everything. Then she said sorry for repeating herself, but it really did appear like Valier had lost all of his recollections. He answered that, aside from the fact that he was a demon prince, he couldn't recall anything else that had transpired, and she said that was a positive thing. The fact that he had brought that risky parchment to her among so many others was incredibly fortunate, so she promised to properly present herself, saying she was a member of the covert team, and protect her from the Demon King's forces. She was Tuesday Aliris. Aliris announced that she would start serving him from now on, and Valier pondered if he had arranged any of this beforehand. He thought it was all fresh. Valier had been curious earlier and asked why a vampire would dwell in such a bright place, with so many people grinning. Aliris explained she had to live in a spot that included a store to save on costs, so she didn't really have an option. Valier felt bad for her, but Aliris said there was something else he needed to learn. There were more demons there than in the Imperial City. Now that the main character paused to consider it, she had noted before that there was a covert team. One member was operating under the fake name of Count Argon Punthius. He was Sarabar, a shapeshifter. Another member had a home near the bronze entrance by the Iron Stream, a werewolf, a demon known as the Wild Beast of Irene. He was the demon who personally abducted the Imperial Princess. Sarkar was outstanding at disguise magic. Using his face-altering skills, he was able to blend into the human world with ease, and Valier realized that he was the one who kidnapped Charlotte. It was wiser to be very cautious around that individual, and the main character inquired more about the one called Wild Beast. She was a woman who led one of the crews that controlled the criminal world of Guardian. Using her skill in close combat, she had built her own group in a short period. Valier couldn't grasp what was up with this bunch that was supposed to be a covert team. They seemed more like thugs. Still, he wondered how the Wild Beast of Irene had managed to create such a large crew with her at the core. Aliris clarified that currently she was in charge of funding the covert team during this time. At least, Valier recognized that she was the head of a major crew, and he asked what the best way to earn cash would be. Aliris gradually said she made money selling sweets to folks, and the main character gasped. They were all just a group of crooks in the end. Ultimately, Aliris sighed because Valier had forgotten everything that had occurred, but he himself was somewhat annoyed with the circumstances. Even so, she was relieved because the prince was secure. They could restore the demon realm, but Valier declined. He had no desire in restoring the demon realm at all. If they rebuilt the demon realm, What would follow next would clearly be another conflict with the humans. Even though he had only witnessed the conflict once, it was awful enough that he never wanted anything like that again, and in the present situation, simply rallying the demons again would be an act of ruin. There was nothing they could do. Aliris questioned how Valier could say something like that. He should restore the demon realm as the demon prince for the future of the demon kind, but Valier declared that the demon realm was finished, so he had no plan of becoming ruler of a land that didn't even exist. Following that reasoning, Aliris should also cease acting like a servant of a lost nation, which left her quiet. Gradually, she agreed and said sorry for taking such a disgraceful position. He must be very wary, so he should focus on resting for now. Before Valier could say anything, she simply exited the chamber, and he wondered if he had been too stern saying those things. Now Aliris, just for a moment, had looked faintly joyful, but he didn't understand what was going on. Aliris, as a vampire, seemed like some sort of lady of the night. Seeing her like that, Valier felt that she was incredibly lovely. In the middle of the night, the main character called out to her and also asked her not to address him as prince anymore, which made Aliris apologize. In reality, he was eager to know what kind of individual he used to be, and she was startled by the sudden query. Stuttering, she said that, of course, he was wonderful, a source of great honor for all demons, but from her response, Valier knew something was wrong. Instead, Valier said he could let that go for now because he planned to rest. They had agreed to meet the other two members of the covert team the next day. Then he realized that if he slept on the bed, she'd have nowhere to rest, but it didn't take long before she lay down beside him. It was a sudden event. Aliris hadn't mentioned anything about sharing a bed like this. Since his rebirth, he thought everything had been terrible, but right now, it wasn't so bad, and he even rejoiced a little for being the Demon King. Morning came, and Valier departed with Aliris to start their secret mission. The city was extremely loud, the revival of the princess, the troop's sacrifice, and the demise of the demon. Of course, they wouldn't stop cheering in celebration. The conflict was over, everyone rejoiced in the streets, shouting for the sake of the empire and the imperial princess. Meanwhile, the two turned away from the crowd to board the train, a vehicle that was from the Alagard area, and they began heading south, moving toward the bronze entrance. Thanks to making the character a clever opportunist, they didn't have to trek all the way from Yongan Station to the express bus hub to Banohang Park. Now they had arrived at the lower part of the bronze entrance, and Valier had to confess it was truly a lair of paupers, but Aliris said they had no other choice. They were going to meet the ruler of the paupers and headed near the drains. Meanwhile, inside the drains, someone could already sense something nearing. As Aliris and Valier walked in, she cautioned him to be careful since it was still quite dim, and soon someone stood up, recognizing that Aliris had arrived. The person who appeared was Loyar, who bowed to the main character and greeted the prince, who mumbled a greeting in return. She was a girl, but he figured they'd never said the prince was a man, so he should have anticipated something like this. Loyar asked if Sarabar was coming too, and Aliris nodded. He was a busy aristocrat and had only given them notice beforehand. The prince had lost all his memories except for who he was, and Loyar asked if that was really true. Valier confirmed it. Even so, Loyar sighed, saying it was a comfort, but the main character didn't understand why she reacted that way. At the very least, he wouldn't command Loyar to lift her skirt and behave like a dog like he used to, and Valier wondered what kind of person this character used to be. Aliris chuckled, saying it seemed like Loyar secretly liked it, and Loyar nervously told her to be quiet, claiming she'd never said anything like that. Valier realized he must have been a real jerk in the past, but it was a pity he couldn't recall any of it, so he apologized. Still, she replied that it was fine. Valier said he knew the past couldn't be undone, but they could try to improve from now on. When he offered his hand, Loyar gave hers, and Valier felt like it was her way of offering her paw like a dog, which made Loyar pull her hand back with an embarrassed yell, prompting Aliris to laugh because it had really been natural. Despite that, Valier said it was okay, he'd be more cautious not to upset her too much, even if Loyar kept doing things like that. Suddenly, they heard a voice and saw someone rushing and shouting because he had just learned that the prince was alive. He ran straight at Valier and embraced him so tightly that Valier nearly fell to the ground from the force of the impact. Sarkar wept, saying he'd been terrified this whole time, and Loyar was stunned that he had run so hard he was breathless. Sarkar cried, saying that the great and mighty demon prince Valier Jr. had to stop the wicked humans. Valier could barely breathe and asked him to release him. Then he recalled Aliris's earlier warning to be cautious with this guy. With complete devotion to the Demon King and the Demon Realm, he was more than ready to give up his soul to rebuild the Demon Kingdom. As Valier tried to pull away, Loyar grabbed Sarkar by the hair to make him step back once and for all. After everyone moved back, they sat down to discuss, and Sarkar stated that Valier had to restore the demon kingdom because it had been ruined. Sarkar declared that he should avenge the fallen ruler and build an even greater and more powerful demon realm, but Lawyer said all of that was foolish and told him to be silent once and for all, and Valier echoed her demand. Still, he was just a useless young kid for such a grand vision. But Sarkar asked what he meant by that, because he was the greatest and most powerful archdemon ruling over all demons, and Valier asked what was so remarkable about that. The three of them fell quiet at that, while Sarkar continued praising the archdemon endlessly until Alaris interrupted him to speak again. She explained that in the dark territory where they had lived, it had been a constant battle zone where blood never dried. A long time ago, humans had begun to form countries to change that, but without considering uniting, they were different races, and the demons were destroying themselves until the day special demons halted the great conflict and united the dark territory. This demon tampered with the minds of others. They gave him the title of Artemon out of respect, and it later became the name of the Demon King's species. Valier understood better now and asked what he was supposed to do, wanting to know if they even had a strategy for that. For now, Sarkar said he should focus on getting stronger, returning to the demon realm, and gathering all the demons. The main character replied that it wasn't the worst strategy, but it was far too dangerous to do that right away. They were in the heart of enemy land, the Imperial City, and he would stay there to study the ways and habits of humans and also develop a plan. Sarkar even wept from emotion, as expected of Valier. He couldn't hold back his tears at the prince's courage. In truth, it was because there were mana trains and human society was much more convenient for getting things done. That's when Sarkar claimed he had a brilliant new idea and suggested Valier enroll in the Empire's learning center called the Temple. Valier asked what kind of nonsense that was, but Loyar and Sarkar seemed to be agreeing somehow. He could grow stronger and sow the seeds of revenge inside the Temple School, where the Empire's talents were trained, but Valier couldn't escape this so easily, so he needed Alaris' aid, who promptly replied that it was a great notion. Stammering, Valier said this was an issue because they didn't even know what would happen there. It would be risky if his identity were exposed. However, Sarkar replied that it was fine because, with the shapeshifter's ring he was offering, Valier could alter his look whenever he wanted. The demon realm was now in his hands, and Valier felt pressured by the intense stare coming from Sarkar, and so it was settled. The main character would go to the temple school using the false name given to him by Alaris and Sarkar, but there was a chance of a probe into the victims of Charlotte's abduction after the princess's return. As a precaution, Loyar went to see Dabin, someone else who would assist them, and Dabin shook hands with the person who came in with Loyar. He asked what his name was, and now Valier had become Ranhar, the blonde-haired lad. Alaris explained there was a risk of discovery if he used the name of the dead Demon King. Loyar asked if he could use the name Shouts of Doom. Sarkar replied that was too odd, maybe even Mighty Ruler, and Alaris responded that his real name would sound far less suspicious than those terrible suggestions. Valier told them to stop, or they'd never finish, and proposed the name Reinhardt instead. He would change his look using the shapeshifter ring, and so he had a new and fake identity and appearance. With Loyar's help, he would attend the temple school. Loyar had mentioned it before. She would take him to get his new identity the next day. Dabin already knew she wanted to take him to the temple. Loyar agreed, explaining she wanted to help that fellow get settled in life. Dabin grasped her intent, but still, he asked how they planned to cover the fees, which caught Loyar off guard because she hadn't considered that. Dabin said that with their current earnings, they couldn't afford the temple school's fees under these conditions. Valier realized he had completely overlooked that it would be impossible for those paupers to afford a year of temple school fees, as they were now the most renowned learning hub on the continent. That was the Temple School of Guardian, as it was widely known, a place where children of noble clans came to learn. If the fees for a year at the temple school were converted into dollars, it would be at least around 100,000. Loyar sighed. It seemed they couldn't afford it with what they were earning now. If they cut how much was being paid to the crew, maybe things could be rearranged. Valier wondered how they could even call it a crew budget when all they did was sell sweets. He'd have to look into that later. Loyar had said many times before that if they did that, they'd have to close the shop, and Dabin felt there was no other way to fix this. So Valier asked them to just cover one term of fees, and Loyar asked if he was thinking of applying for a grant or something like that, and he agreed there was something like that. Now that the champion was gone, the Empire would start searching for the second or third champion, so if he became skilled, they might cover the fees. In fact, if someone was very skilled, The temple school would cover the fees regardless. It didn't matter whether they were looking for a champion or not, and even if he was a minor demon, he was still an archdemon. Valier said that as long as he trained diligently there, he was sure he'd be able to gain at least one skill, and Loyar replied that it was good to have such boldness. If the worst occurred, he could always create a skill using his success points. Dabin replied that even so it was still tricky. They couldn't avoid the fact that their funds weren't enough to cover the fees right now. Besides, folks didn't come to the Bronze Gate Bridge as much anymore. That was why their income was steadily dropping, and Valier asked if they couldn't just rethink their strategy.